I'm Andrew.
And I'm Angus from Cracka Wines. And today we're doing Grape Varieties, Cracka Grapes 101, Lesson 1, Riesling.
That's right. And today we're actually looking at a Riesling from the Eden Valley, which you'd probably say is one of Australia's most prominent places to grow Riesling, along with the Clare Valley in South Australia. They're probably the two most well-known in South Australia.
Maybe Prongerups and...
Prongerups in WA and the rest of the Great Southern in Mount Parker. You're probably looking at Tasmania. You might be looking at certain parts of the cooler bits of Southern Victoria and Western Victoria in particular.
Henty for sure.
Henty, yeah. The Grampians also make some good Riesling from time to time too. They're probably the main hotspots for Riesling in Australia. What about around the world though, Angus?
Around the world, Alsace, France and Germany, depending on who's won the most recent war. Mosel, Rheingau, Washington State, New Zealand. I should say Washington State in USA, New Zealand as well. You know, Marlborough, even Otago can do the odd decent Riesling. Martinborough can do the odd decent Riesling. Yeah, that's better. Oh, actually, the odd one in Italy, but really not much. I mean, what are you looking for in Riesling? What do you like in Riesling? Look at the colour.
Well, to start with, Riesling is, for my money, is the king of all white wine grapes. The reason why is because no other grape than Riesling can manage to express exactly where it comes from like Riesling can. It's almost like you're looking at a little window straight into exactly where this has come from. The season, the site, the soil, the way that the winemakers sort of looked at it. Nothing expresses itself quite like Riesling does.
I will agree with that. I mean, when I'm looking at Riesling, you know, I want to have colour, I want to have, you know, really bright colour, a bit of green in there, certainly doesn't hurt. Light yellow. I want it to smell like summer flowers and citrus and fresh and lively when it's young. Gets a bit kind of toasty, bit of Caro when it gets a bit older. But, you know, the great regions, they keep their signature as well. So like the Mosel, you keep the slatiness. You might get some kind of honey kind of, you know, fruits in there, but at the same time, it still has that, you know, that lovely acid cut of the Mosel and also the, you know, the slatiness. Then the mouth light, you know, fresh, always want, you know, fresh acidity.
Definitely.
Bit of sweetness is not a bad thing. Can be amazing if it's got enough acid. Then beautiful clean lines. So just as clean and fresh and lively. No oak. Don't put any oak in.
No.
Please.
Or fortify it.
Or fortify it. Just fresh, lively, drinking summer. You know, you can drink it all year round. Really.
Yeah. And speaking a little bit about sweeter styles and dry styles, I mean, classically, the style of Riesling that was always made from the old country, so we're talking about the traditional French style, always had, and German style for that matter, always had a little bit of sweetness.
Or a lot of sweetness.
Or a lot of sweetness, as it may. Now, during a certain period of Australian time, we ended up with the idea of that Riesling was always sweet.
Yep.
And after many, many years of the whole idea of the Moselle, as it was called at the time, always being sweet, you ended up with the almost like the ideal that Riesling was a sweet grape. And after a couple of really bad examples, you end up with this terrible reputation that Riesling got. Almost in the backlash to that, the modern style of Australian Riesling is very much a very, very dry style.
Super dry.
And the
super dry, super clean.
Super dry. And the one we're looking at today is probably a perfect example of that. I mean, it's an Eden Valley Riesling and it's made dry, it's made crisp, and it's made to be straight down the line, all about acidity and nothing about sweetness.
Which is the Aussie way.
Which is definitely the Aussie way.
Old-fashioned, obviously. But Riesling goes in the cellar, tubes.
Definitely.
It's nice, young, keeps its acid, lives for, you know, the good Aussie ones, 10 years is pretty good. Good ones from Germany, Alsace can be 20 plus.
Or 100.
Yeah, they can go forever. Canada, ice fine.
Yes, ice wine, of course.
Bit of Riesling there too.
Yeah, definitely, exactly right. If the Riesling, the only challenge I suppose with Riesling is that it can be quite withdrawn. It can be quite down the line. There's often no obvious sweetness to it. If anything, Riesling is almost like
it's austere.
Yeah, it's almost like a thinking person's grape, and I mean that sounds a little bit pretentious in a way, but at the same time, it's a sort of variety where you really need to be working hard to work out what's great, to be producing something that's really interesting. You can, I mean, Riesling is one of those varieties where you can't just go into the winery and go, great, let's just add a whole lot of oak to it and all that sort of stuff. You've really got to make sure that you've got your grape growing sorted from the start to make something that's going to be amazing.
The fruit's crap in the vineyard, the wine's going to be crap.
Yeah, exactly right.
There's no way you can hide it. So there is Cracka and Riesling. But now we move along to, away from the Langmore, to Hanging Rock. Hanging Rock Sauvignon Blanc from the Macedon Ranges. Jim from the Macedon Ranges. Sauvignon Blanc. Andrew, do you hate it?
I don't hate Sauvignon Blanc, Angus. No, look.
You can tell me. Yeah, no one else is listening.
To be brutally honest, look, I wouldn't say the Sauvignon Blanc is my favourite grape. I suppose that is a lot to do with the fact that as far as a profile goes, Sauvignon Blanc is really all about one thing, and that's about big, bright, aromatic, juiciness just popping right out there. Grassy, herbaceous. Hey, this is Sauvignon Blanc. The biggest criticism I have of Sauvignon Blanc is that it's a pretty one-dimensional beast.
That's it. What else is there? I mean,
exactly.
I would agree that it lacks interest sometimes, but as a summer drink, you know, whether it's exuberant, tropical fruit, bit of grassiness for interest, you know, you can't go past it. You know, when I'm looking at Sauv, you know, you really want a light colour. You want a bit of green in there,
Definitely.
you know, really light yellow. It smells like tropical fruit. It smells like passion fruit. Bit of the famed gooseberry, bit of mango, bit of herbaceousness is something that often gives away Sauvignon. And but in the mouth again, it's streamlined, it's fresh, it's lively. I know why, you know, it's the most popular grape in Australia at the moment because, frankly, it just, you know, it's like Coca-Cola. There's a lot of acid, there's a lot of sweetness.
I don't think it's that bad.
No.
Well, the reason why I suppose I was a little bit critical of it is just because that it has been made in many styles to be just a little bit boring, and that's as simple as that. The reason why I say that is because there are some excellent Sauvignon Blancs out there.
There are.
And where does the best Sauvignon Blancs come from, Angus?
Of course, comes from. God, I don't know. No, Adelaide Hills make some good stuff. Yeah. Even some people down in the Yarra and around there can make some pretty interesting ones. In Australia, obviously New Zealand, Marlborough, Martinborough, etc. But the world actually, there's Sauvignon Blanc in a lot of countries.
Yeah, there is.
US does some pretty good Sauvignon Blanc, often a bit of oak, which is pretty interesting wines.
Definitely, yeah. Fumé style, yes.
Exactly, the Loire Valley in northern France.
Sancerre,
Fumé.
Sancerre, yes.
But, you know, they're good wines. They're food-friendly wines.
They are food-friendly wines, definitely.
And they're just exuberant and lush and, you know, hard to go by.
Yeah, definitely. We're talking just before about oak, and oak is one way, I suppose, where the smarter producers have realised, hey, we want to try and make a more interesting style of Sauvignon Blanc. How do we do it? And I was critical before about saying that Sauvignon Blanc is a little bit one-dimensional. And the way that they can try and flesh that out is by some clever winemaking. So they might use some barrel fermentation, for example. Bit of lees. They're essentially trying to look for giving that a little bit more texture, a bit more body, and a little bit more interest. Because as far as Sauvignon Blanc goes, it's always going to have plenty of acidity because it's picked quite early.
Yep.
And the aromatics are always sorted. So it's going to smell good and it's going to be nice and dry. So all you really need to do is just flesh it out a little bit through the middle.
That's what we should all be looking for. Fleshy Sauvignon.
Fleshy Sauvignon
Bit
Blanc.
of interest. So Sauvignon can be good when it's got interest.
That's exactly right.
Okay. Well, there is Cracka and Sauvignon Blanc. Now, we've gone on to... it'd be rude, I think, to avoid... If you're talking white wines, you've really got to talk about Chardonnay. And this is actually a pretty amazing block of Chardonnay.
It is a very amazing block of Chardonnay.
Australia's oldest.
Yes, it is.
I would imagine. 100-year-old block of Chardonnay.
That's right. So this is the Tyrrell's HVD Hunter Chardonnay. And now, as far as one of the places to grow Chardonnay in Australia, whilst I suppose it is classically the home of Chardonnay in many ways, it probably doesn't quite get the respect it really deserves. I suppose for a long time, that was because being quite a warm climate, the Hunter was producing these really big, rich, fat, and quite old-school buttery style of Chardonnay. And the result was that you end up with, when the backlash started, probably a decade ago against that
Hunter was... They were the pawns in the firing line. They got knocked over
the firing
first.
line. That's exactly right. Or even
Rosemount, Roxburgh.
Oh yeah, that was
Show Reserve.
It was the best wines. You know, some of the Australia's best Chardonnays at the time were coming out of the Hunter Valley, and it was only due to, I suppose, consumer sentiment that said, "Hey, we don't want that style anymore."
Yeah.
That has really sort of if in many ways, it actually forced them to evolve into a newer style of Chardonnay, which brings us actually neatly to this wine.
Indeed. I mean, the thing about Chardonnays, look, I disagree with Andrew. Andrew's Riesling man. I'm Chardonnay man. I really think that Chardonnay is, for me, the greatest white grape variety because it has a range of textures and it has a really wide range of textures and flavours. So texturally, it can be like a Riesling from somewhere like Chablis or Tasmania or even New Zealand, Cumia River or something like that.
Yeah.
Where it's just this kind of quite steely, fresh, lively number, all the way to this creamy, voluptuous wine. Also, they can age. The good ones can kick on for 10 to 20 years.
Definitely.
Australia is, a recent article. Andrew Jefford, very well-known wine writer, basically reckons Australian Chardonnay is better than Burgundy these days, except for the very top wines.
Definitely, yeah.
At a tenth of the price. But it's got this texture, and then oak. There is just this seamless integration between Chardonnay and oak.
Yeah, definitely.
They're natural. They're family.
They are. They're a great pairing. And look,
got to be French oak.
I'd agree with you, Angus, in the fact that whilst I am a Riesling man, I will quite happily drink Chardonnay because I think it is right up there with my other favourite white wine.
This is good.
This is really good. And one of the ways that actually this is made really good is that they give it some very careful oak treatment. And I suppose that is what we're talking about, the modern Australian way of Chardonnay, is that they're really careful about trying to emphasise the fruit that it's called.
And natural yeasts.
And natural yeast fermentations, trying to use really quite light and really careful oak treatments and careful about their Lisa treatment and moving towards a style that is much crisper, dry. And you're looking at the colour of this, how clear and bright it sort of is.
13% alcohol too.
13%. We're looking at something that is almost Sauvignon Blanc-like in many ways, but it's got that extra little bit of richness around us that comes from the grape.
When I'm looking for Chardonnay, the Chardonnay, Riesling is all limey, Sauvignon Blanc, or passion fruit. Chardonnay always has white peach for me. Always got this white peach kind of lemon, rindy, citrusy. Sometimes it goes to mango and pineapple. Sometimes it goes to stones and that kind of thing. But white peach is what it tastes like, but it's got texture and richness. There's a lot of phenolics in the wine, and so it's got some mouth. It's got some real kind of grip in the mouth. Even the unwooded styles from Chablis have some real grip in the mouth.
Yeah, definitely.
But then this beautiful, clean, fresh acidity, lightness. This has got a beautiful length to it. It doesn't. It's like the new style. It doesn't hit you like a brick in the face like the old ones, or it's like chewing on IKEA. This is nothing like that.
No chipboard.
No chipboard here. It's more a fine pool cue, but it's got this just lovely kind of freshness and length. And look, this is pretty damn good Chardonnay. And Chardonnay, a lot of people have given it a stick for a while. The new Australian stuff is really top draw, really more dependable than Riesling these days at the top levels.
I don't know if I can agree with that one.
The Barbs from Adelaide are on the way. Sorry. The Germans, I'm very sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. But it's got texture and richness. What do you look for in Chardonnay?
Well, I think you've covered most of it, actually. I really think that texture is one thing that really makes Chardonnay so interesting. And ultimately, it's the reason why Chardonnay is probably the best food wine of any white grape, because it managed to have body as well as having acidity. So it's managing to tick enough of those boxes to be something that's really quite a complete wine.
Yeah.
And the other thing about it is just have so much more complexity. Whilst I like the line and I like the beautiful aromatics and the purity of Riesling, I think that it is almost like the voluptuousness that you get from Chardonnay that makes it interesting.
But the good ones that have measured voluptuous.
Yeah, definitely.
It's kind of like a tease to you. You see this kind of weight, but you never quite, you never quite experience all of it. But there, I guess the key is Chardonnay. Give peace a chance. Give Chardonnay a chance. It really deserves
give Chardonnay a chance. No, it definitely does, and it's really good to see that Chardonnay is actually catching up again. Some recent figures have come out that says that Chardonnay is actually back, slightly increasing its sales, particularly in the premium side of things. Yeah, where people have started to realise that, hey, these top premium Chardonnays, wines just like this, are really very interesting and well made and quite complex drinks. And ultimately, when you're talking about white wine, you want something that's going to be complex and interesting, and Chardonnay can really offer it for you.
Go Chardonnay. Right then, now it's time to hit rouge.
Yes.
It's time to get red. We've been hanging around the white stuff for too long. So, Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir is, for me, the mecca of wine grapes.
It's also the bitch of wine grapes.
It
too.
is. It's many things, but Pinot Noir, it has a combination of very complex fruit, which a number of other grapes have, but it also has beautiful texture to it. The texture of Pinot, I don't think can be beat because it just has this silkiness of texture. In Australia, I think we often, we forget about texture a bit. We ignore it. We go, right, what does it taste like? Is it mouth-filling? Bang. Am I going to, I'll just drink it. Whereas this stuff, it's about texture. It's about finesse. It's about elegance. None of which are things that I possess. But it's just beautiful to look at. I mean, Pinot Noir should always be kind of mid-ruby in colour. If you see dark Pinot Noir, look, it's not right. Pinot Noir,
I disagree with
that. True. No, because often when it's really light, it means they've put some stems into the ferment, and that can make it a bit more interesting. But it just has this beautiful. This is all right. Beautiful lifted perfume. I mean, what do you look for in Pinot?
The great thing about Pinot is that it manages to combine the things you look for in red wine. So you're thinking about tannins and structure and body, as well as having quite a feminine sort of personality. This is, you're talking about wine that is both soft as well as being firm at the same time. It has those many different layers to it, and I think that's what I really appreciate about Pinot. Unlike, say, Shiraz or Cabernet, which is very much quite a forceful wine.
Do you know what Jancis says?
What?
Jancis Robinson, she says that Cabernet Sauvignon is very much an above-the-shoulders wine. It's kind of an academic wine. You kind of think about it, and it's big and it's bold, and you kind of get it. Chardonnay's, I should say, Pinot Noir is really below the belt. It really is. It's something that appeals to your soul. It's got these kind of elements too that get you excited more than any other wine, I think. This is a bloody lovely wine. I mean, you look for lifted perfume. Pinot Noir and Nebbiolo are two grapes that have beautiful kind of perfume, and this just, I could almost smell it for days. Really, it's a bit earthy. It's a bit spicy. There's a bit of Chinese 5 spice in there even. But then there's this beautiful red fruit underneath it. This is from Marlborough, which makes some actually Pinot Noir. Some people say the Pinot's better than the Sauvignon Blanc. I won't go into that either. This is a beautiful wine.
Yeah. What I think that is the difference between Pinot Noir and many other grapes. We're talking more about Cabernet, more about Shiraz and Merlot, is that because it is actually really quite a hard wine to get right. I mean, it's really very difficult in the vineyard to get it perfectly right. It's quite finicky in the winery. You have to really know your site. You have to know your winemaking to make it really well. That because there is so much more that people invest in the wines, that they end up being much more of a passionate exercise. You can almost feel like, and it sounds quite pretentious to be saying so, but you can almost taste a bit of passion in these sort of wines. Yeah. They end up as much more sensual than what can be, as you're talking about before, I guess, about an above-the-shoulder sort of style of wine. And I think that's what also you seem to taste that much more. I mean, you can't just make industrial Pinot. You can't just use mega tankers to make Pinot because it doesn't have soul. Whereas great Pinot, it tastes like earth. It tastes. It's a bit funky. It's a bit stinky. It's a bit weird sometimes, but it tastes real. Yeah. And I think that's what I really like in great Pinot. Yeah. I mean, we're talking great Pinots of the world. We're talking about places, things like we're talking about the Great Burgundies, for example, and they're from these tiny little estates that have been farming these one little tiny plots, and it's all about biodynamics, and it's all about hands-on winemaking in tiny little batches. It's all about tiny little selected little plots that are the very best.
And that's why Pinot people, sometimes known as Pinophiles, they really are just so dedicated to it because there are only a couple of spots in the world that really make it. It's Eastern France, it's Martinborough, Marlborough, maybe also Canterbury and Otago.
In Australia, you got Yarra,
Washington State, Oregon, and then WA, maybe not, Tassie. There's not that many places. You go to Shiraz, you go
over there anyway.
Most places in Australia, do a half decent Shiraz.
Yep.
So maybe Tassie.
Yep.
But Pinot, you know, you've got to search out. That's why they're not cheap as well.
Very much
Because
so.
with other grapes, with Shiraz and Cabernet, when you start making more, when you start increasing your volumes, you know, quality kind of goes down slowly. Do that
Pinot.
with Pinot.
Big drop.
Straight to the floor. So Pinot, what are you looking for? Light colour, not too much colour. Perfume, complexity, length, just like everything else, but just silk. You want to be, it's like drinking red satin sheets. It's a good one. Right. So, from the Pinot Noir of Burgundy to the Pinot Noir of France, or of southern France, I should say. Grenache.
Yes.
Now, Grenache, look, it gets a bit of a hard, it gets treated pretty hard, I think. I think there aren't many producers who actually really put their heart and soul
Into Grenache, sadly.
into Grenache. And it can be absolutely miraculous, but it's a bit like Pinot Noir, really.
Yeah, it is.
Really needs special places.
And funny you
to
should say that, actually, because there's quite a few Australian makers who feel the same about Grenache, that it is a grape that really you need to think of it in terms of Pinot. It's something that is quite a feminine wine. I mean, the traditional style where we try and make a Grenache more like a Shiraz is probably wrong.
Yeah.
We want to look at something that is quite sensual, because what makes really lovely Grenache is actually something that's just this beautiful silken sort of style of wine. I mean, it's going to have not quite the same sort of structure and that sort of perfume as what a Pinot does, but at the same time, it can actually provide a whole lot of drinking pleasure and a whole lot of really interest too. Again, it's just this grape that's really just been maligned over the years because it wasn't Shiraz, essentially.
Yeah. I mean, I think, it was a blending partner.
Definitely.
In South Australia, a lot of people just treat it as a blending partner. It produced, it was quite high yielding, made loads of wine, they could blend it away. The fruit is pretty different to Pinot, it's very ripe fruit. Almost like red skins, kind of, dark cherry. Alcohols, often quite high. 14 is probably minimum.
That's right, and it needs the sunshine to be able to get right, which is why it tends to be
South
Australia, warm climate.
I mean, I actually think, and this is like pretty controversial, but I think, a lot of McLaren Vale could be better for Grenache than Shiraz.
Yeah. Well, the argument is that the Barossa Valley is actually better suited to Grenache and Mourvedre or Mataro than it actually is for Shiraz. I mean, obviously that's a contentious point, but as far as when you're looking at it in the vineyard, it's something that it is quite drought tolerant. It likes hot, it likes heat, it likes sandy soils, which is there's plenty of those in McLaren Vale and the Barossa.
Loads.
And so as a result, you end up with a grape that is actually probably better suited than a lot of other varieties.
So what do you look for in Grenache? What do
I look for? Okay, there's one, I could probably say what I don't like in Grenache, and we're talking about oak. And I think that Grenache is one variety where you need to be very careful about the way that oak is used. I think because it is quite feminine and it is quite light, and it's all about this lovely bright red fruits that you really want to try and preserve. That when people try and give it too much oak, they want to put too much in new oak, it actually tends to sort of hide that beautiful red fruit. Yeah. And I think that what I'm looking for then is something that is going to be quite fruit dominated. It's something that really just showcases this is great fruit. We've grown something that's amazing. I don't really want to taste that much oak at all. So if there's one thing that I'm really looking for, Angus, is actually really not obvious oak at all.
Yeah, I like them. I like them to have a bit of savouriness to it.
Oh, definitely.
A bit of animal, a bit of horse to them. There's because it does have quite an obvious plush sweet fruit. The best ones though really show this savoury edge.
Definitely.
And I think probably long extraction times, post ferment, I think is probably the key to that, and not too much oak.
Definitely.
But again, some people are taking Grenache seriously.
They are.
There's probably though 10 producers in Australia really paying it its dues, and can be a great wine though. And I think look out for it, especially food wine with some stew or something like that. Can be beautiful.
And now we're just talking about this in purely the context of being straight Grenache, but what we're sort of glossing over a little bit here is simply how well it goes in a blend. I mean, the classic blend is just, we're talking before about Shiraz. The classic Grenache, Shiraz, Mourvedre blend is something that really is, it's almost like the archetypal blend for what you can really do in the Barossa. I mean, just using one region in particular that really shows that you can alter the percentages each year to try and make what is the most obvious wine for the year. There's going to be like, this is the very best we can make for this year. Like, for example, in 2010 when they had crap yields, they might have less Grenache.
Less Grenache.
So instead, the Shiraz was quite good in 2010, so you just bump up the Shiraz. So as a result, it ends up as this component that is the most, such an important component that is into making what is probably the best blend out of the Barossa.
Indeed. So there is Grenache. Now, to finish, it would be un-Australian.
It would be very remiss of us.
To not finish with Shiraz.
Definitely.
Shiraz is obviously, our largest planted grapevine in Australia.
Yes.
And, it really is, a wine and a grape that, we've made our own. Everyone else calls it Syrah around the world, except us. We've decided it's called Shiraz.
That's right.
And, it does actually suit our climate beautifully. Because Shiraz, originally comes from the Northern Rhone Valley, so near Lyon in France. But it loves some kind of granitic soils and some kind of warmer climates, and really that's what we've got. We've got a range of them. I mean, where's your favourite Shiraz in Australia? Here, you're going to get yourself in some trouble here.
The Hunter Valley.
Hunter Valley, oh my God. Bruce is going to be on the phone. Bruce is going to send you something. Look, I'm trying to think of what mine is. Look, I've got to be honest, it's probably something like Central Victoria.
Okay.
Or Beechworth or something like that. Okay. Like, Shiraz I think sometimes can be, just this mouth-filling fruit, and there's some good tannins there, but sometimes it lacks a bit of, real interest. But Hunter as well, I'm a big fan of. And Hunter wines, I've been lucky enough to have some Hunter Shiraz from the 40s, and they're still drinking all right. Like, we don't find that. There's nowhere else, I think, who makes wines like that almost in the world, really, in terms of Syrah. I mean, Shiraz, what's good about Australian Shiraz? What's bad about Australian Shiraz?
What's good about Australian Shiraz is that we make something that is so voluptuous. It can be a beautifully smooth, rich, mouth-filling wine. It's sort of, if there's going to be one thing that is going to be so typically obvious and lovely from the first go, then you're probably going to say there's going to be Shiraz will be that great. Yep. What's the problem with Shiraz is, though, is that in that same sort of sentence, I think that it happens quite a bit, is that they're really trying to push that extra intensity. They want something that's going to be blacker, that's going to be richer, that's going to be sweeter than it really needs to be. And as a result, you end up something that's almost a caricature of what the ideal Shiraz would be. And I think that that's particularly alcohol. The alcohol
sometimes a function of vintage, though.
Oh, for sure. But at the same time, I think that's what I don't like about Shiraz. And that's actually one reason why I am so, happy to say that I think that some of my favourite Shiraz come from the Hunter, where it's much more of a savoury and medium body style, and lower alcohols are encouraged in many ways in that traditional Shiraz mould. Yep. But yeah, I think that
you're going to get hate mail.
Look, that's probably confining it to one sort of measure. I mean, I still love Barossa Valley Shiraz. There's no question about that. But that's more just my preferences as far as... No, I think that the great thing about Shiraz and the great thing about Australian Shiraz is that it is quite accessible. Is that that if you give someone a lovely, rich and voluptuous Barossa Valley Shiraz, that it's going to have a whole lot of appeal.
And as soon as you open it, as soon as you smell it, you know exactly where it's from. You're going to go, this is sunshine in your glass, big mouth-filling, plummy, blackberry, bit of spice, bit of earth, necker bottle, 14.5% alcohol.
That's right. I think that there's something to be said for that how easily and so... And so straightforward that sort of wine is, that that straight from there that you're going to like it and that everyone else is going to like it too. Yeah,
I mean the colour also. I mean the colour, is often the wines are black as the ace of spades. Yeah. As soon as people see that, they love it. As soon as they smell it, it's like it's almost like dessert. There's just this richness of berry fruits. Also, it can be quite mouth-filling, full-bodied. Tannins, often the tannins aren't massive.
No.
Which I think probably helps it to beat Cabernet for a lot of people. Cabernet often has more astringent, firmer tannins. Shiraz, the tannins are often not quite as hard. And then, the good wines have length. And we produce it everywhere. Great Southern, Margaret River, bloody all of South Australia, even Coonawarra. Most all of Victoria, basically.
Yep.
Tassie's the only place that doesn't have any
Well,
good
they've got a little
Shiraz.
bit, but they're starting.
Luckily.
It does. It grows almost like a weed, and it will grow absolutely everywhere. And that I suppose is the other good thing about when talking about the accessibility is that Shiraz can be good everywhere. And at the same time, there's some very different versions of it. I mean, you go from the really quite fine-boned Beechworth style, for example, which is just all about pepper and spice, over to what you'd probably say is something like this McLaren Vale style, for example, which is just all about this punch. I mean, it's almost like this black richness, this sort of like enveloping sweetness that you just can't, you're just like, wow, God, it's rushing over me. It's like oil sort of thing. And I suppose it's that massive difference that we've got where we can actually say, hey, this is the different styles of Shiraz that we've got that makes Shiraz interesting.
There's one for everyone.
There is one for everyone.
There is one for everyone.
Yeah, so I was talking about the fact that I like Hunter Shiraz, but at the same time, I also think that before you accuse me of backpedaling, that there is so many interesting wines that come in different versions. That's the Grange is the perfect example. I mean, Grange is something that is produced from a whole lot of different regions every year, but every year it produces something that's really rich, powerful, intense, but also at the same time quite drinkable too.
Very drinkable. So Australia, Shiraz, I guess it's the great Australian grape, really.
Definitely.
Cheers.
Cheers.
McLaren Vale.